Now again, did you envision, when you started writing though, did you envision any single series that would be a continuous thing, such as what people can think of today?
Well, when I sat down, ironically, the very first League book that I wrote at 18, the first novel, is still in print.
Okay.
So that one, yeah, I really, because I grew up with Star Trek, I wanted to be Gene Roddenberry. And, you know, having people embrace the world and want to cosplay the characters and learn my languages, you know, have them speak Truzani, that was the dream that I had as a little kid. I wanted to come to things like this because I grew up at different conventions. So that was my dream. And yeah, I actually wanted to do that.
So you began with world building and kept with that?
I did.
Okay, so then David, the same question in a way, did you envision series to the degree that you have now, which would be somewhat mind-boggling? And was it set up to be a world building exercise or a character-based exercise?
Well, for me, whether it was going to be a series or a standalone, I put about the same effort into building the world before I started writing the story. For example, for the Honorverse, I wrote like a 70,000 word essay before I started writing the book. And that's pretty much what I had done for the earlier ones as well. Partly because I had been a D&D games master for a long time, and they wouldn't let me into their dungeons. I had to run the dungeon because I was that irritating player who never forgot anything that the party had stuffed into a bag of holding. Yes, get out the pan of overfilled lasagna and the Garfield troll will leave you alone, you know. But Jim Bain actually said to me, David, everything you write is spawning sequels. So why don't we do something novel, you should pardon the expression, and plan a series from the beginning? So I pitched 10 ideas to him. One of them has since become the Saffel series, one has become the Gordy Protocol, but he didn't look at any of the others as soon as he saw Honor Harrington as a 6'2" Eurasian female starship captain. I was not aware that he had been looking for somebody to write Horatio Hornblower in space for the last 15 years. And so he immediately wrote me a 6-book contract, which at that point in my career was huge. And he released the first 2 novels, I think, 45 days apart, which was one of the first times anybody had done that. And it absolutely jump-started the series. Now, the series was supposed to originally run to only about 8 novels. It kind of growed. Part of it's his fault, because Honor was supposed to die at all costs, but he'd screwed up the timing on the Honorverse, sort of thing he does, and I wouldn't have had time for her kids to grow up. So unfortunately, Honor had to live, and it's his fault.
Kept her alive.
Yeah, that's true.
Although, point of order, I think a 70,000 word essay is technically called a thesis.
Well, okay, Jim.
That's actually a short novel.
Jim,
That's short a novel, actually.
Sharon said that I should tell everyone in the audience, and she was rather smirking when she did this, that they're really going to like a certain book.
Oh.
Okay?
Okay.
It's not mine.
Oh, I see.
Yes. It had something to do with peace talks or something like that.
When I finish a novel, Sharon's the first one I send it to. So.
Then mine go to him. Sort of a quid pro quo.
So Eric, with 1632, I remember when that first came over the transom at Random House, and when it was going around, and that one, it had what could be a self-contained premise, which is, you know, a very simple, straightforward alternate history. Well, I don't know about simple and straightforward, but an alternate history. Did you envision the degree to which it was going to spawn sequels, and how have you managed the fact that your sequels end to be going in like 20 different directions at once with 20 different other people at once too?
Okay, I wrote 1632 as a standalone novel. I had no plans or intention of making it a series. And if you read it works fine as a standalone. What happened though, it did very well, and this is very early in my career, and it did very well, and we had fan involvement from the very beginning because of the way I wrote it. So the fans wanted more, and I was leery about it because you have to be careful with series. All of my other series are really basically big, long novels that have one single story arc. It takes you, the Belisarius series, for instance, takes 6 books, but it's really one big novel. So keeping it fresh isn't so much of a problem as long as it's a good story. But if you start an open-ended series that has no end in sight, you got to be careful with it because it's very easy for it to get stale. And that's what I was worried about. But what happened was Jim waved what was then a lot of money under my nose if I would make a sequel out of it. And right about the same time, David and I were talking, and he'd always wanted to write an ironclad novel. And obviously, ironclads are pretty hard to fit into the Honor Harrington universe. So I said, okay, we'll do an an ironclad novel for the next book in the 1632 series. That wound up being 1633. And I agreed, Jim, okay, let's give it a crack. And then, this is the part I've always loved the most. Jim called me up a little later on a phone, and he said, Eric, if you'll let me put David's name as the lead writer, I'll give you another $10,000 on the advance.
Wait, he didn't tell me that.
I know he did. I'm sure he did.
I wondered where that $10,000 went.
So I said,
Those were production costs.
I said, done, you know? And, well, I'm not an idiot, and I know how this works. And what happened was, 1632 sold 7,500 copies of hardcover, which was quite good then. That was the year 2000. And 1633 sold 17,500. It was a 250% jump. And then the third novel that came out, which was Galileo Fair, which I did with Andrew Dennis, that was the first one that got me on New York Times bestseller list. That sold 25,000, I think. So that's how it got jump-started, but what happened was, from the very beginning, I had fans closely involved in it. And one of the first books we did was an anthology called Ring of Fire. And the way I did that was we set aside half of the book for established authors. David was one of them. Misty Lackey was another. But the other half we opened up to submissions from the fans. It wasn't sort of broad to everybody. It had to be people participating in the discussion in Baines Bar. So over 100 stories came in, and I wound up, I think, buying 9 of them. And that kind of got the ball rolling, and ever since then, there's no other series I know of that's as closely, tightly fan-based as the 1632 series.
Certainly not mainstream publishing.
No, not mainstream. And we have, for instance, a professional magazine, the Granville Gazette's been published professionally since 12 years now. It started in May of 2007. It makes a profit. It pays professional rates for the writers. I do not know of any successful magazine in history that was not based on a media property. Mm-hmm. This is based entirely on a literary property. And I don't know of any other series that's ever been able to do that. And the reason is because of the big involvement of lots of other people. And part of the reason I wanted other writers is that was one of the ways I wanted to keep it fresh. Was I like it when other authors come up with ideas that I wouldn't have thought of. And sometimes I have to say no because it, won't really work right, but I usually try to do it.
Let me point out one other thing that Eric did totally right in this series. This is not a series in which one thing is different and everything else stays the same. That's really bad alternate history. Eric, from the beginning, was aware that if anything changed, everything changed. And that means that he has this incredibly rich savanna with the gnu's running around on it for the leopards to chase down, because he can change anything he wants. And one of the most interesting points, especially in the earlier books, was all of the folks from the past who wanted to get a hold of what was in the Grantville Library so they'd know what was going to happen and they could take precautions, and weren't thinking through the fact that everybody else wanted to know what was in the library to take precautions. And so he just gave himself this incredibly open canvas, which allows him to accommodate so many different writers who want to go in so many different directions. Eric really hit the sweet spot on this one for a sustained series with just incredible fan involvement.
Yeah. I just love that concept of the high school library being the greatest treasure trove of knowledge on the planet.
Yeah, no, it is.
That's amazing.
Every country sends spies there to copy, something out of it.
Yeah.
So, Jim, you've got more than one series out there. When you envisioned any of them, and I think in particular the Harry Dresden stories, did you envision an ongoing thing, or again, were you starting simply with doing a novel? And if you were envisioning it going on, to what extent did you picture this happening?
Well, I was very strongly inspired by the writing style of J. Michael Straczynski in Babylon 5.
Okay.
I love the fact that he started plots in season 1 that didn't pay off until season 5. That just wasn't done on television at that time.
Right.
And it was just so rewarding as a long-term fan to be able to see, you get to the end of season 5, oh yeah, that was in season 1, that's awesome. So yeah, I was always planning on writing a series, just not this series. I started the Dresden Files as a project to prove to my writing teacher how wrong she was about all the things she was trying to teach me. Yeah, Debbie Chester, that's right. She'd been trying to teach me for several years, and I had been very resistant to what she had to say because, I had a bachelor's degree in English literature with an emphasis in creative writing, whereas she had merely published 40 novels.
What did she know about it?
Yeah, exactly. So finally one semester I decided, you know what, I'm just going to show her how wrong she is. I'm going to do everything she tells me to. I'm going to write the things she recommends me to write, and I'm going to fill out all the little forms and worksheets. I'm going to do all her little lists and character things, and then she's going to see what kind of terrible cookie cutter pablum crap emerges from that kind of process, and I wrote Stormfront.
Did they use that as marketing copy?
They did not. No, they did not. But it was working. When I turned it in, she reads the first couple chapters and says, "You did it." I said, "What?" She says, "You did it. This will sell. I don't know if it'll be the first thing you sell, but this is of professional quality. It will sell to someone if you keep working on it. So keep going." And it was from her. She was not a terribly encouraging sort of teacher. She was sort of preparing her students for the actual world of publishing, where nobody holds your hand. Yeah. And her commentary on my writing had included things like rolling up my chapter, leaning across her desk, hitting me on the head with it and saying, "What were you thinking?" So when she comes out and says, "Well, you did it," and she sounded a little disappointed, but I mean, eventually the Dresden Files went, and I was just like, okay, well, I guess I better do some more of this and just shut up. So I did.
So I'm going to start back down again with Sherrilyn and ask, has there come a point in your primary series or any series, we always think about refreshing a series in order to keep sales going. And clearly all of you have suffered from tremendous tribulations there.
Yes.
So instead I'm going to start with, has there come a point where from a creative point of view, you have decided, I need to do something to inject something new into this narrative?
Not yet, at least not, from, the publishers are always looking for new ways to market things, but in terms of the actual writing, I just like to blow things up, kill more things. And I don't know what that says about me, but then, I like to write about assassins and demons, so, there are a lot of demons that are out there that need killing, not necessarily that are always paranormal. So no, I haven't found that yet, and maybe that just makes me even weirder than normal.
Probably so, because I think almost everybody has come to a point where they've thought, oh, I got to do something different here. So you haven't, from a creative point of view, come to a point where you said, okay, I've enjoyed everything that I've done so far, but I've really got something new I want to do?
Well, I write in so many different genres too. I mean, I don't just write science fiction, fantasy. I write in horror, I write in historical. So I think for me, I just go into another series.
Well, that works.
Well, no, and that's exactly the way that it works for me too. If you limit yourself to a single series that you're working on, then you probably are going to have that moment when you're just like, okay, I'm done. But I have always just turned to something else, and upon occasion, what that's meant is spawning additional series that I had no intention to spawn. And then having people say, you have to finish so-and-so. I'm like, okay, which of my other series should I stop? What about this one? No, don't stop that one. But that is my mechanism for staying fresh with all of my stuff has been to do something else immediately after I do a book in any given series.
Okay.
After an Honorverse book, do a Saffel book, and then do a Norfresso novel, and just hop around that way.
Okay, but let's say you found that you've hit a point where you can't do another Honorverse book because at that moment you need to shift gears. Has that shifting gears made it? What has that done to the moment when you came back to Honorverse?
I've never had that moment.
Okay.
I mean, seriously, I haven't. Now there have been periods when my writing in general has gone better for physical reasons. Like last year, I face planted into a cement floor here at DragonCon and concussed myself, and for 9 months I couldn't write at all. And there have been other times when there have been health issues involved that I have felt like I didn't do my absolute best work. And there's at least one novel that the publisher moved the release date up on 3 times, so it never got the final edit that it was supposed to get. But those are mechanical issues that are not related to my writing process per se, if you follow what I'm saying.
Okay.
And I have enough voices in my head screaming to get out that I can always find something else to write about, okay? And every so often the FBI says, Mr. Weber, we want to talk to you about what you've been writing here, but by and large that doesn't happen very often, not more than once every couple of years.
Eric, again, has there come a point where you felt like you needed to inject something or wanted to inject something?
Before I get into this, there's a funny story I have to share. I called Jim Bain up once, and he was in a really grumpy mood.
Jim?
And I said, yeah. No, but even for Jim, he was in a really foul mood. And I said, boy, you're in a foul mood. He said, yeah, it's that goddamn Weber. He's costing me a fortune. And I said, why? He said, well, he's insisting on writing another one of his Basel books. And I said, Jim, I'm sure they're going to sell well. He said, yeah, of course it'll sell well, but if he wrote another Harrington book, we could make a lot of money. And I said, Jim, it doesn't work that way. Fiction is actually not like making washing machines. It's, and he said, yeah, I know that, but you goddamn writers. I basically do the same thing. I work. I'm best known for alternate history and specifically the 1632 series, which can get irritating if I go in a bookstore and the only thing they have up on the shelves is 1632 books, because I actually write a lot of other stuff.
Eric, with your stuff, they would have to build a separate branch of the store.
Yeah, well, okay, but I don't know. Honestly, Steve, I never can say I ever faced. I'm very skeptical of the wisdom that you hear all the time that, well, keep the readers on edge. You got to kill somebody off. You got to, break up.
And for me, it just happened.
No, well, I'll tell you how he does it in a minute. But I, for instance, am quite proud of the fact, quietly, that in 1632, the founding novel, there are 4 romances in it, and 4 couples get together, and 23 novels later, they're still together and doing just fine. And nobody complains about it. Now, you have to do things like separate him and have him go off on adventures and perils of Paul and Pauline. You know, you got to do all that. But I can't honestly say, Steve, the only one time it happened, sort of, was at one point in the series, I realized that I faced a horrible situation, which was that peace was, it was after David and I wrote the Baltic War. And I realized peace is about to break out all over.
What do I do now?
We can't have that. So,
Well, clearly your couples can't have that because that's when they'll get a divorce.
well, no, I mean, what that series is, it's not military SF, but what it is it's a series set in time of war. You know, war is a sort of background, just like the Napoleonic era or something like that, or World War II. And so at that point, I could stall for 2 novels, but at that point I figured out that the Ottoman Empire would attack, and that would work great.
When Eric and I started talking about doing a 1632 collaboration, I asked him if I could rehabilitate John Simpson. And he said, well, sure. You know, he was basically intended as a foil for Mike Starnes, so I wasn't really planning on doing a whole lot with it. One of the things that Simpson and Starnes underscore, and this is something that Eric has definitely internalized in the series, is the most conservative imaginable 20th century American has more in common with the most radical imaginable 20th century American than either of them has with the 17th century, okay? And it gives an opportunity to look at the I guess you would say the philosophical value spread between the 17th century and what makes the 20th century work and what doesn't, and underscores something that Eric and I both believe, which is that democracy is a really messy form of government. It just happens to be the best one around, okay? And that was, I think, that is another factor in the success of this series, that there's such a broad spectrum of both 20th century characters and 17th century characters. And they're played fair with everywhere, okay?
Yeah,
And I think part of the problem is we don't feel like we see enough of that in real life, okay? But the other part of it is that what Eric is talking about here is the reality beneath all of the surface squabbling that we do today, okay? And that resonates with readers. That's one of the reasons why this series has done as well as it's done.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, one of the things I had in mind when I wrote it, I mean, it's an adventure story, and there's action and romance and all that, but I had another thing I wanted to try to accomplish, which I think I did pretty well, which was I think people tend to take things like democracy and egalitarianism for granted because we've grown up with it.
Certainly Americans do.
Yeah, Americans do, and I just wanted to sort of rub a late 20th century American town up against the early 17th century, just to sort of bring all that out, which I think it did pretty well.
Well, and an American town in a slightly red state too.
Oh, well, yeah, except the distinction between blue states and red states, in my opinion, there's a lot of bullshit in there. I mean, the largest manufacturing center in America with the most blue-collar workers is Los Angeles metropolitan area. Second largest is where I live, the Chicago metropolitan area. The third largest is northern New Jersey and New York. So, and plus I lived in West Virginia, and a lot of those quote people they call red now, you know, it's a lot more complicated.
Yeah,
it
no,
really
that's
is.
true.
It's much more complicated.
That's more a quantitative observation.
Well,
just
the
based
thing,
on
one of
photos.
the things I actually wanted to stress in the book is that leadership matters. It really does. If you have good leadership, you tend to bring out the better angels in people's nature, and if you have bad leadership, the opposite happens.
Well, and the other side of the other thing that you've done there is you have provided a set of challenges that allow people who might have very different social construct or personal value system to bring out the best in achieving a shared goal that they wouldn't have had to achieve in 20th century America. So you give them a stage on which they can interact positively instead of tearing at each other. You see?
No, that's true.
Well, Jim, we're sort of going back to the beginning question, which is basically, did you have a point in Dresden or in any of the series where you felt that there was a need for recharging or for changing just from a creative point of view?
I've never really felt like an overt need to inject stuff in. My editor thinks maybe I inject too much already. You got to the end, when I got to the end of Changes, there's spoilers, the people who've read it know. But I got to the end of the Changes well, I actually can't tell the story without spoilers, so I'll just tell it. But I got to the end of Changes, and my editor's like, oh my God, you killed them! and my response was, yeah, now we can do the really fun stuff. And it just sort of went on from there. I think I'm a little bit free of it because once I finished this first book, once I had that conversation where my teacher said, you did it, the next thing she said was, now go out and outline the rest of it. And she meant the rest of the novel. But I came walking back into class with an outline, the next week with an outline for a 20-book series with a big old trilogy capstone at the end of it. And I spent about, it was a conference class where you went in once a week and you got 40 minutes to talk to her. And I spent about 35 of the minutes just burbling about all the awesome things that were going to happen. And kind of got to the end of my spiel and was like, what do you think? And I can still, just in my head, see the expression on her face as she was thinking to herself, well, I finally got this kid on board. He might be able to do something. I can't derail him now. So, but there's no way she was going to, she couldn't tell me there was no way I was going to sell a 20-book series to an editor. So she said, all right. She says, I think if you can get a 20-book series published, you should be doing okay. And again, the massive understatement, I laugh now. But yeah, and so because nobody told me it was impossible, I did it.
You decided if you were wonderful to that person or truly cruel. I think the answer is yes.
Yes.
Steve, let me throw a sort of different take on what you're asking out there. There have been times when I have hit a point at which I know exactly what I want to do, and I haven't figured out how to do it.
Okay.
Or where the scope of a task has daunted me and sent me off to do something else. For example, what brought that to mind is my Multiverse series, the Hell's Gate series. Okay, the problem is that I have two totally separate societies with totally separate histories on the same planet. And so they have different place names for everything, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in working in it, every time I name a place in one universe, I have to go into my index and also name it in our universe so that I can find it again, and name it in the other universe so that I have a continuity base. And because of that, and that's just one example of what I've got to do because of the fact that they're identical worlds, just with different people living on them. That series is incredibly dense in terms of note-taking and keeping my references up to date and so forth. And so if my batteries aren't fully charged, not necessarily for a specific series, but for writing in general, then I'm going to sort of slide off of that one onto one of the ones where I don't have to invest as heavily in you see what I'm saying?
So some of it is time management as well.
Yes, it is, definitely. And falling face down on cement floors doesn't help. Okay, right?
That does tend to alter plans.
But it's very liberating. I mean, everybody should try it once. I mean, you get a 9-month vacation.
Yeah, well, you did. I got a call from Jim Bain, and he said, Eric, David Weber just fell down, shattered his wrist. He's not going to be all right for months. I need a lead novel in 2 months. Can you give me one? And I said, yeah, not the one I'm working on, but I could do The Tyrant, because David Drake had already plotted it all out, so, and he does a wonderful, great plot, so all I had to do was sit and write. But that's what I got out of it. I didn't get a 9-month vacation.
Always looking out for you, Eric.
I have to say, by the way, for some time now, I've owed Jim a great big favor, because one thing that happens when you write a long series is people will complain that the book didn't end. And it's like, how the hell do you think you're gonna wrap everything up in one novel in a series? You can't do it, right? But now what I do when they complain to me and I said, you think I'm bad? At least I never ended a novel by having my hero falling dead into Lake Michigan. You know, my hero is at least alive at the end of the book. I remember when I read that thinking, I don't believe he did.
But he was only mostly dead. Yeah.
Well, I knew he was going to come back. I mean, some things are given, but...
Have you ever seen the series Supernatural?
Okay, now, it's wild because I had several ideas for topics here that you have all now managed to circle around completely. With one exception, and this is sort of an odd one because it's sort of not about you. It's about today and it's about somewhat these guys, which is at the moment, there are a number of publishers who are really actively seeking not to do series. Because at the moment, in the retail community, there's a lot of drop-off with second books in a new series, where readers seem to be reacting with the, I'm not even gonna try book one, because I know that you're forcing me to buy book 2 and 3 as well. Or, I'll read book 1, but you know, that's enough. And it is a problem for publishing, and it's a problem for authors. Based on that, would you recommend to someone who was starting today, because clearly you guys came in at a time when that wasn't the case, would you recommend to somebody today even really coming at it from a series, or more like what you did, Eric, which was you could do 1632 as a book?
The advice I always give people is write something that's a standalone novel that you could turn into a series.
Yeah.
But don't make it require a series because you're going to run into, and I don't know that it was any different 20 years ago. I mean, the thing you got to understand about series is if they're successful, they're great, and they're cash cows for the publisher and the authors as well. But the big majority of series don't succeed. You don't so much remember those because, you know, 1 or 2 books come out and that's the end of it. But,
Well, once upon a time, and this was still sort of true when I broke in, bookstore buyers had the I think it was the 80% rule, which is that they only, an author's title was in, and they bought 80% of what they had bought of the previous one based on sales.
Right.
And that was a guaranteed way to kill a series, because they were only going to buy 80% of the second book of the series, and then they were going to buy 80% of what they bought of the second book by the time you got to the third book in the series. And Jim was one of the people who was instrumental in getting that rule set aside. He said, you know, you're killing your own sales by doing that. But my suggestion is, especially if you're not already known for writing series. If you're already known for writing a series and you produce something that is clearly going to be another series, your readership will come with you, okay? Because that's what they want.
Right.
All right? But it's a good idea to make the first 3, 4, 5 books in the series work as a standalone. It may be one where they know, because there are ongoing relationships in here, that there's an earlier book that would make this a fuller, richer experience. But this book by itself works for them. Okay? Now by the time you're 6, 7, 8 books into a series, you can't do that because there's too much backstory. But try for the first, you know, half dozen or 4 or 5 at least, to make each of them completely a complete enough package that you don't have to have read the earlier ones to enjoy this book. And you have a wrap up at the end of it where you know there's more that's going to happen for this character or whatever, but you don't stop it in mid-battle and say, tune in next year to find out what happens.
The axe was about to come down.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Once you've got a series going, you can do what I've done a couple of times, where like I'll end a series with somebody walking in and saying, we need to talk. And that's the end of that book.
Oh yeah, no, that's a very good way to do it.
Yeah.
Dave Gemmell always wrote his his novels as individual hero fantasy novels, and he actually committed probably the greatest sin of all, which was his single most popular character was Drust the Legend, who David killed at the end of his first book he ever published.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, David was always like, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Sherrilyn, since you work in so many different subgenres, would you say that it's a good idea to always, in every genre, just write the single book? Or is there a genre that you've worked in where it really is best to create sort of almost a soap opera stretch?
Well, it's interesting that you said that, because when I got started, they actually didn't want a series. So I in the original cycle, the thing about publishing, it's always, and everybody knows it's cyclical. And that was one of the biggest things that I had in the beginning, was I kept pitching all of my series as series. And Dark Hunter, you know, it's one of the reasons it took me almost 20 years to get it published. I kept pitching it going to, really, I've got 50 books. Okay, I'm exaggerating because I'm a writer. But when I was first pitching it, I actually did have about 15 manuscripts already completed. And every time I'd pitch it to an editor, they were overwhelmed by it. They're like, we only want one book. And that was one of the reasons why, in order to sell Dark Hunter, I had to go back and write a fully standalone book in order to get my series sold. Because it ended up, I had to strip, anybody who's read Julian's book, you know that I had to take, there's no mention of Dark Hunter in it. And now it's very confusing to readers, because they're like, we have a Dark Hunter book, that's not book one, but is book one. And trying to explain that to readers, because I don't want to pitch that to readers today, because there's absolutely no Dark Hunter. Or in the case of the League books, because it was a fully huge series, I ended up selling the first 3 books to 3 different publishers. And each one had to be turned into its own set of separate universes, because we have these non-compete clauses. And when I sold book 1, they didn't want a whole series, they wanted a book. So in order to be able to take that to another publisher, that publisher didn't want anything to do with that universe. So I had to go in, strip out every character, anything that made it identifiable as a universe. So the League has actually been recreated 4 different times, which makes it really confusing for you guys. So yeah, that's why in 2009 I had to go back in and then put everything back together. So it depends on, as a writer, how flexible do you want to be, and how much do you have to want to recreate your universe. You can, so do you want to do it like me, where you're like, oh my God, I really want to sell my universe, and I'll do anything to sell that book. Even rip my universe apart, put it back together, and make my readers crazy in the process. God love you guys, you'll come with us. You know, and you'll sit there and do the mental gymnastics with us. You can do it either way. I mean, God love, my career has been insane.
My feeling is that the thing that readers really tune into, more even than the fundamental concept of the universe that you're building, is the voice in which you tell them about the universe you're building. It's the way you tell the story, not necessarily the specific story that you're telling. A good storyteller will tell good stories, you know, across the, but that's one reason why I think readers will go with you and trust you that we're going to go somewhere I want to go because I like the way that you tell the story. Now, the other side of that is that you owe them to take them to a good place. But if you have a weak idea that you tell really, really well, it will succeed. Whereas a strong idea that you tell poorly will fall flat on its face. Okay? And I think that's one of the things that Sherrilyn has going for her. Her storytelling voice is such that people want to read Sherrilyn's stories, not necessarily Dark Hunter stories or whatever. They want to read her stories. And so they will go where she goes, no matter how confusing it is.
And it is, let's face it, yeah. So yeah, I would say stick with, if you can, don't leave your universes, because they're hard to create. You know, we spend our lifetimes doing this, and once you create something like that, but don't be afraid. I mean, if you have to rip the baby apart, that's how we got Frankenstein,
I'm not sure
right?
I like that metaphor, but I agree with the concept.
Right, my children cringe when I give that. Luckily, they're not here. But yeah, I mean, you know, Mary, she'll get Frankenstein out of it. So yeah.
David, consider what she did to her brother, and then, you know.
You know,
But
I
you
started
write
in horror.
so-
Yeah. Don't ask a horror writer these questions; it gets scary.
Okay. Now, I'm going to open it up to some questions in a moment, but I want you each to maybe have one last, if there's one last thing you'd like to say on this concept, or even just about your creative process in working on the things that you love. Just, you know, pretty much, because of the nature of this, you can pretty much say anything here, except where your brother's buried.
Yeah.
So, actually, Jim, let's start with you because she just did a lot, so.
Okay.
Final words.
Ten or less.
I don't know, buy our books. Now I'm under pressure, jeez.
What is lighting your fire about series at this moment? What is it that you're working on right this minute that's in a series that is making you feel really, you know, fiery about that series?
When you get characters to behave exactly as they ought to behave.
Do they?
When you have the characters, they don't always. But when you get the character and you put them in that spotlight moment that you're doing the drama on them, and you go, yeah, there is nothing else that guy could have done in that circumstance. That's such a good feeling because you know you set it up right when that happens.
Yeah. Do you ever find though that character does the exact wrong thing and you're like, what the hell am I going to do now?
Yes, jerks. And then I have to go back in and like do surgery on their backstory or something like that. You know, figure out why it is they need to behave the way I need them to behave. Because at the end of the day, those people work for me. And I mean, I know there's a lot of authors who are like, oh, my characters wouldn't do it. And I'm like, hey, my characters work for me. They're on the street if they don't do what I tell them to do. But it is very important to make sure that you've lined up the characters so that it's natural for them to do it at the same time. And if they're not doing it, then you've screwed up the process somewhere, and you've got to go back and look at it and see what you can do to fix it.
And the process has to be one which naturally leads to the outcome that you're looking for. You can't just have a character do something totally out of character given the backstory.
Right.
Because the plot needed it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, or sometimes you do, and that's when the mind control stuff comes in.
It is kind of cool when the character does something completely unexpected and then you realize that you actually foreshadowed that 3 books back. Though.
Yeah.
That's when the reader goes, holy crap.
I meant to do that.
I just didn't know I did.
Yeah.
Eric, your turn.
Well, just don't admit it. No, I had that in mind all along. By and large, I agree with Jim. It's people, oh, when I'm writing my characters, I never know what they're going to do. And it's like, my characters damn well work for me. And if they don't do what I tell them to do, they get fired. But that's not the same thing as if you're doing your job. Right. And probably the biggest surprise I ever had was when I came to the 5th book of the Belisarius series, and I realized to make it really work, I had to kill off a major character that I had not planned to do. And to this day, I'm still getting crap for it. People will tell you, oh, you should kill off characters. Yeah, well, understand, if you do, a lot of your readers are going to be very...
Could it possibly be the guy who jumped over the wall?
Yeah, the guy who,
Yeah, that guy.
The guy
okay.
who did the Achilles stunt, except not Achilles, Alexander, but he wasn't quite that good. Yeah, him.
Horatius, he
Yeah.
crapped out, yeah.
My main feeling is short is I've never written a book I didn't want to read. And I think that's kind of, if you're not enjoying the writing, don't, just get rid of it and start something else. I mean, every book I've ever written, I enjoyed writing it. I think some are stronger than others, but I'm pleased with all of them on one level.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed writing them, and I think you don't want to overthink this too much. Part of it is quite honestly, there is some skill involved in this, and if you're good at it, after a while you start having confidence in your own skill. And I don't really worry too much about whether I'm going to tell a good story, because I pretty much know I am. And that actually makes you do better, if you have that level of confidence.
When you trust yourself.
Yeah, when you do. Yeah, it's true with any craft.
Anything you do. I would say that one of the things that I have found most beneficial over the years is to not plan things out in too much detail. Okay, because then partly I have to write the book to find out what happens, the same way that my readers have to read it to find out what happens. But the other side of it is that you are free for the characters to grow and change in ways that you might not have contemplated when you started. Characters grow as a consequence of things that happen to them. And if you haven't planned out everything that's going to happen to character A or character B, as their world impacts them, that impacts their character, that impacts you as a writer, and ultimately that impacts the reader with the concept that this is a real, live, growing, changing human being that you're writing about. So if you, for me, I establish the beginning point where these guys are going to start out, and I establish the end point that I want the story to reach at the end of the trajectory. And then I'm perfectly willing to go anywhere that it takes me in between. And if I'm going through and I say, oh wow, this offers a possibility to do thus and so, then I dive down that rabbit hole and do a book that deals with that, and then comes back to where I meant to go, with the impact of the rabbit hole excursion woven into the DNA of the series as a whole.
Darn it, this was the problem with being a W. You get to the end and at the alphabet and all the good answers are taken. Okay, well, no, I agree with everything that's been said. But the thing is, you get to explore everything in more depth. The characters, the world, I mean, you really do. And like Jim said, the problem is you sometimes write yourself into a hole. You lose a character that you shouldn't have. You know, it's like, book 2, he died. How do I duct tape that head back on that guy? Because I need him now, darn it. Now I gotta go create somebody and kill them off. But yeah, it really is. I mean, you get to do things that you know, in a single book you can't. The characters grow and you get to watch them. It's kind of like having children, and they say and do things you don't anticipate, and there's really nothing more to add.
When you have fully internalized, integrated a character, you don't think about how that character is going to react to stimulus A or B. You just know, okay? And so that's the problem I think that Jim was talking about, when you reach the point and the wrong stimulus has been provided and you didn't realize that until you got there. And then you have to go back and sort of rethink, how do I get this person to naturally and spontaneously react the way that I need him or her to react? And once you've got those characters in there, once you're at that point where this happens, so she's going to do that, okay? Then you're free to really enjoy the joy of writing the story.
Okay, well, we've actually filled a lot of the time here, so I'll be able to take a few questions until basically they kick us out. But they are very militant about that, so, you know, be ready to run for the door. Who has any questions here? Yes.
Mr. Butcher, for the Dresden series, one of the things I'm a reader, not a writer. One of the things I found is that one of the things still not working. Testing. Yeah. So one of the things one of the things that I've found with the books that I read is that there is some degree that seems necessary that you give descriptions of places and people and stuff that we've already read. How do you identify which of those are necessary versus which are superfluous?
Well, when you're putting the book together, you know, you're trying to get from point A to point B. It's sort of like traveling across, I mean, for me at least, it's sort of like traveling across country. You know, if I'm going to drive from Kansas City to Los Angeles, you know, I don't know like every step of the road along the way, but I'm going to know several things along the way. Well, I'm probably going to start on I-70 West. You know, I know that. So when you're putting it together, the things that you want to support with more words on the page are the things that are going to have some kind of dramatic impact on the story, or some kind of impact on the story in some way. You know, you can spend a lot of time describing things that don't matter, but you're just wasting everybody's time while you do that. So you try and focus on the things. Writing is always about a game of you know, keep it leaner, keep it moving, keep the reader, you know, turning pages. So that's what, I mean, that's what you have to focus on. You don't have time to describe everything along the way, which is one of the reasons I love writing the Dresden Files. I don't have to describe anything. If I'm writing a fantasy, I've got to, they're in a restaurant. Okay, how do I describe a fantasy restaurant, you know, and make it work? Because I've got to do that for you. In the Dresden Files, you know, I can say, we met at McDonald's, and everybody knows. I don't have to do any work. It's creative laziness. But yeah, you should be focusing the effort of putting in description and art on something. It should be on things that matter, either emotionally to the character or plot-wise to the story. And when a writer is spending time describing something, ideally that should be telling you, hey, this is important. I'm shining a spotlight on it. So if it's something that helps you move forward, great. And otherwise, don't spend as much time there.
Okay, next. Yes, the young woman there.
You're all, is the mic off again? Oh, I have to speak loudly. So you're all very accomplished writers. You got pretty much your set audience. Have you ever intentionally jumped the shark or put in something stupid just to see if you could get away with it?
Okay, so her question is, have any of them ever intentionally jumped the shark or done something stupid to see if they could get away with it?
Well, depends kind of who you ask.
Not intentionally.
The third solo novel I published, the first novel was Mother Demon, solo novel. The next one is 1632. And the third one I published was A Philosophical Strangler, which is completely different. It's a part of a surrealistic fantasy I've been working on since I was 22 years old. Jim Bain thought I was crazy to publish it. He said, you're out of your mind to follow 1632 with something this weird, which it is. I mean, the hero's a serial killer, you know. But he's a nice guy.
They all had it coming.
You know, anyway, but I was really determined to do it because that book meant a lot to me personally. I've been working on it my whole life since I was 1969. One of the things I don't do is worry too much about the market. I just don't. I mean, I think you can screw yourself up that way. You can't be oblivious to it, but I really feel strongly you've got to write what you really want to write, and if that means jumping the shark, well, I don't think I'm jumping a shark. Somebody else might, but.
You killed him! You killed him!
I've had occasions where I did things that I was pretty sure the readers were going to be majorly pissed off with me about because for some reason it had to happen in the story. For example, killing Andrew LaFollette. I tried hard to not kill Andrew. I just knew he had to die. I didn't know why. It wasn't until after I turned the book in that I realized it was because Honor loses like 95% of her family and you've never met them. But you have met Andrew for 15, 20 years. You've seen the relationship between them, so you can generalize from that to what else she's going through. I think probably the book that the most people think I jumped the shark in was Out of the Dark, because it starts out sort of a Clancy-esque thriller about the invasion of Earth and ends up with Vlad Dracula saving the day. And they're like, what? And I'm like, look, I gave you clues from the beginning, his name, you know, the name he was going by, you know, the fact that he was able to sneak up on a Marine in full, I'm planning an ambush mode with nobody hearing a thing, you know. The fact that he's impaling alien bodies to discourage them. I'm like, what more did he's from Romania, for God's sake, you know, what more did you need? But Chris Kennedy and I have just turned in the sequel to that, Into the Light, in which you discovered that the vampires aren't exactly what the vampires thought they were, much less what you did. So there, nanny, nanny, boo, boo. But
If you ask my editor, I jump the shark every book, but you know, the Paranormal Pirates, that was one, they're like, what? Then, you know, you've got Zarek, he's an insane lunatic that you want to turn into a hero. Then there's Styx, where everybody thought I was nuts. How do you ever redeem a villain of that nature? And then with the League, there's Julian's book, who he really was a drug-addicted psychopath that became a hero. So yeah, according to my editor, almost every book I hand in, they're like, we cannot make that guy a hero. What are you thinking? or heroin sometimes, depending on.
But the fact that that is what you need to do with that character is one of the things that makes the book succeed with the reader. Okay, and a good editor recognizes that, okay, this doesn't make sense. I don't see how you can make this work. But if you really think that, you know, I like you as a storyteller, and you really think you can make it work, write the story and let me see it. And usually they go, damn, I didn't think you could do that.
I do like the contrast here where it's like, have you ever jumped the shark? No, 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 every time. Next question. The gentleman in the teal shirt.
How do you keep a long-running series from getting repetitive? So unfortunately, I've only read Jim's book so far, but so he's got an outline that says, okay, this time there's werewolves, this time there's necromancers, this time there's these vampires, this time there's other vampires. How do you keep every single one from not feeling the same? Just for everyone.
The world in which you're writing changes as a result of the actions in the current book. Okay, I mean, that's what you need to do. You need to be tuned into the fact that the universe you're writing is changing. One of the problems with writing the early Star Trek novels was that you could not change any of the major characters in any way. They had to be who they were at the end of the book, exactly who they were at the beginning of the book. And that's why the really successful of the early ones concentrated on new characters who were introduced and used Kirk and Bones and Spock as backdrop, okay? But if you are writing a series in which the universe is advancing, is changing, okay, then that automatically helps to protect you against the no freshness quotient. My belief is that anybody who writes a series rather than a series of standalone books that all follow the same cookie cutter pattern, okay, you're not going to succeed writing a series if that's the way that you write. All right, one of my favorite authors, this English author who published, among other things, under the name of Donald Green. Okay, if you read his standalone novels, by the time you're a paragraph into the second chapter, you're already figuring out who's going to be which trope in this book. Each individual book is really, really good, but you know who these guys are. So I can't read them back to back to back the way that I can read book 1 in a series, book 2 in a series, book 3 in a series, because it's a different way of storytelling.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. Keith Laumer wrote that way too.
Yes.
You read one Keith Laumer story and it's really good. If you edit a 10-volume reissue of them, which I did, and you read one Keith Laumer after another, you get tired real quickly because it's kind of tends to be the same thing.
And each one of them individually is good. It has energy. It pulls you through.
Yeah.
And you just need to read something else between them.
Yeah, you do.
Each one wrecks your character's life in a different way.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I hate to do it, but we're out of time. But I do want to thank our group here because this has been a wonderful panel. And I want to thank you for being a wonderful audience.